Excessive heat is our big story at 6. Firefighters having a hard time battling the rising temperatures.
On the front lines of that fire yesterday when he collapsed, likely as a result of heat exhaustion.
Crews say the heat is another factor slowing them down.
Firefighters did go to the hospital with heat exhaustion and smoke inhalation.
But imagine fighting a fire in triple-digit temperatures and wearing all that gear. It's fireproof, heavy, but the material doesn't breathe well. That adds to your body's heat.
He was in tip-top physical condition, but he died of heat stroke on the fire line.
All the effects come down on him at the same time. The adrenaline's pumping, they're fighting fire, the heat, a combination of many things.
We went down to Texas end of July, beginning of August. It was about midway to getting into the last third of fire season. We'd been busy up to that point. We'd been down in southern Arizona and we'd been in the high country of Colorado. So a wide range of different fuel types and conditions. Our first night in Texas, everyone described it as kind of oppressive heat, just that really high heat with humidity. The fires in Texas have been going on for, it seemed like, most of the summer. So we'd been getting a lot of information. We saw some warnings about the high heat, fuel types, fire activity, things like that. And that was after the fatality incident, so there was a lot going on to that respect. So awareness was high on heat illness and the extreme heat in Texas at the time. And it was running and gunning from the get-go. It was busy.
Basic human physiology suggests that heat production is a function of metabolic activity. The more active the skeletal muscle is, the more heat production that individual has to figure out how to offload to the environment. So when the environment is pressing down on you or pressing back on you because the temperature of the sun and the ambient conditions are quite warm, or the temperatures associated with the fire, that radiant heat from the fire get to be pretty demanding, those add to the stress. That doesn't mean that a person can't develop heat cramps, heat exhaustion, or issues in cooler environments. If their work output is so aggressive, or aggressive enough to cause an elevated core temperature, and even in cooler ambient environments, they can't offload it quick enough, they could suffer from a heat-related injury.
We started noticing that line production was decreasing, particularly in the heat of the day, in the late afternoons. And when I observed my most fit, hardest working firefighters going down really quick in that environment, that's when I knew that it truly was not business as usual. That was kind of, I think, the seed of trying to figure out what was going on, and that's something beyond whatever those frustrations were, beyond the crew just not producing. It wasn't through lack of effort or lack of ethic. The physiological was kicking in, the heat illness was kicking in, that environment was knocking back our production.
Most of the issues that firefighters are going to face is going to be due to an exertional heat stress. So they're working hard in an aggressive environment. The muscle contraction that happens over and over and over as the person's line digging or hiking aggressively or whatever, as that metabolic heat production escalates, the core body temperature starts to run upwards. And when it gets to a critical level, and that's going to be different for every individual, there's a lot of individual variability, then the person might start to develop those cramps. Heat cramps can happen as a result of an electrolyte imbalance, or it could just be a slight drop in hydration, or it could just be an irregular rise in core temperature. It's really hard to pinpoint what the precise mechanism is. But when those happen, they function as an early warning sign to say, hey, wait a minute, something is not right here.
Let's get you out of this heat. Get that fire shit off you.
He said earlier his hands were cramping up too.
If they don't address those symptoms, guaranteed heat exhaustion is going to enter into the picture. When a person starts to experience heat exhaustion, certain telltale signs are always present. So usually it's dizziness, usually it's fatigue, it's usually associated with, and most often associated with, a feeling of overwhelmed. The body's just overwhelmed with heat.
Everybody on the crew experienced at least mild heat illness once or several times throughout the course of the assignment. Those early symptoms of headache, nausea, lightheadedness, some cramping, everybody experienced that while we were down there across the board. Some of the most severe effects occurred with our sawyers, Certainly with the amount of work they're doing, the extra layers that they're wearing, I think contributed to that.
The common approach to treating heat exhaustion, at least it seems in military and in the fire agencies, is to address it with aggressive hydration. And that is, again, secondary to what really needs to happen. And so cooling the individual is really the primary course of treatment.
We got to get you out of the heat, dude. Getting you in the sun's not helping.
Getting them to stop work, which they're probably going to voluntarily do because they're going to collapse, or they're just going to complain to the point that they're going to need to stop. So getting them into the shade, cooling them off with external cooling, and then down the line, addressing any hydration issues that may need to be addressed. If they continue to ignore those symptoms, then it can progress almost instantly from heat exhaustion to heat stroke. And at that point, then helicopters got to get involved. Medevac's going to be the case, and then a whole lot of other individuals are put at risk. So you need to get that person off of the site immediately, cool them down rapidly. But the only way you're really going to know, is this heat exhaustion, is this heat stroke? That's not really the argument that you need to have on the mountain. That's an argument that's reserved for the clinical environment. And the only way you're going to know is if you have a good solid measure of core body temperature.
We really relied on our EMT to make judgments for us to trigger an EMS response. We did rely on personal assessment on those early signs though. We wanted folks to be honest with themselves, and if they weren't feeling so good, to speak up about it. To either tell their buddy, tell their leader, tell me. And I said it over and over and over again because it is somewhat against our natural culture. And I think the reason why is it can be perceived or sometimes perceived as a weakness. And in that situation, I saw it had nothing to do with fitness, strength, motivation, work ethic. It was a physiological issue. Our mission is to suppress fires, given whatever objectives are given to us, employ the best tactics to achieve those objectives. We're a production-oriented culture, and we're given a mission. We want to do it as best we can, as fast as we can, as good as we can, and taking breaks will naturally detract from your line production, from the speed at which you accomplish your tactical objectives. So those are counterintuitive, but the bottom line that we saw was that we could produce more line if we gave the crew members more frequent breaks as it got hotter. You have some conflicts. Number one, you want to take care of the folks working for you, but you have objectives that you want to achieve as well, and so you have to find the balance. How can I take care of my folks while still achieving the objectives and perform excellent work? And so going through some of those experiences, we started changing our tactics. We came up with some ideas of how to take the breaks and kind of a more formalized approach to it, utilizing temperature charts and some ideas that we'd seen from the military, and coming up with a work-rest ratio based on escalating temperature, where it broke it down into a few categories, and when we hit those temperature trigger points, it resulted in us taking set breaks, work-rest ratios.
There's no scale that you can calibrate that's going to be more effective than a really experienced crew supervisor, that they know what that crew can tolerate and what they should tolerate, and to be conservative in the work rest that's necessary.
A bimodal shift, as I saw it, as it related to that incident, would be just focusing work production, focusing line suppression efforts in the mornings between, say, 0600 to 1400. And then through 1400 to 1800, pull back to patrol monitoring, like we were doing in the work-rest ratio, where it involved refurb, active patrol of the line we've put in, as well as scouting line that we're going to put in later, responding to any kind of flare-ups, spot fires, any kind of needs around the fire. And then in the evenings, pick it back up as temperature started to drop back down, get back on the line, and continue with line construction. It may not work in all situations. It's likely not to work in every situation. So some things that can be barriers are travel times, as well as any logistical needs if you're needing to pick up food or water, things like that. There's so many different variables, but the shorter that we can make briefings, the quicker we can get to the line, and the better we're able to utilize the more mild conditions. You know, the animals have figured it out. Desert animals are active in the mornings and evenings and shade up during the heat of the day. It's about being more efficient with your energy.
That would be awesome if we'd be able to predict who was going to go down before they went down, so we could address it ahead of time. What happens though, if somebody goes down from a heat-related illness, the likelihood of a subsequent one is higher. Right now, we have data from other projects that strongly suggests that the biggest protection against the potential development of a heat illness, especially in a group of 20 people on a crew, the individuals that have the highest aerobic fitness level, they're going to have the best possible protection. So of the different categories that puts a person at risk for heat-related injuries, certainly aerobic fitness is the highest. And then whether or not the individual has had a previous illness is another predictive factor. Hydration status of the individual, I suppose, is somewhat linked, but it's really difficult to evaluate accurately an individual's hydration status. The worst practice that you can do is to drink exclusively an overabundance of plain water. That's going to do you a disservice, and that's more dangerous than not drinking an adequate amount of fluids. Nowadays, we think of that as hyponatremia, when the blood sodium drops below critical values. So have some sport drinks always on hand, have electrolytes in the foods that you have, and use those during the especially aggressive periods of work when the sweat rate is at its highest. The idea of cumulative exposure may work in their favor in terms of assisting them to develop some of the physiological characteristics that are associated with heat acclimatization.
It really had more to do with the amount of exertion that they were expelling. Acclimation really didn't, it helped. I think it provided some more resilience to the heat illness, but if folks were working hard and it was hot, symptoms arose.
In a given 14-day cycle, if they're not given an adequate work-rest ratio here and there, and their diet's not very great, and their sleep's not very great, which certainly sounds like most 14-day assignments, then that could increase their risk during that window of time. But don't use segments of the fire season to train for the future fire season. You want to show up fit for duty. That includes being aerobically fit to tolerate the work and also to tolerate some of the environmental concerns.
You know, as a hotshot crew assigned to West Texas IA at that time, after a fatality occurred, it was not lost on us that we were a hotshot crew doing the same exact thing in the same exact place at the same time that resulted in a fatality. So that drove home the point that we were in a serious condition, a serious environment with extremely serious consequences. And so that facilitated us really taking a look at how we were doing business and how we might change it to make sure that we did everything possible to keep the crew safe. But I think overall, it's really more about just being willing and able to recognize that you're in a situation that requires some different tactics. So you need to recognize that you're in a potentially dangerous situation, learn about it, and adapt to it. And that'll be different every kind of different situation. It may not be heat, it may be something else. So I think it's imperative on everyone that's on the line to be able to, and be willing to, and strive to assess the situation, recognize it, and figure out a way to deal with it.